It was the time between treaties and votes, between deciding to pact with the town outside our village. We were an isolated small village that lived lawless, but liked how the number was. So at that time, deciding to let new folk from other islands in were hard dealing with. With only a very small village, with only a few spare houses, there wouldn't be enough room in shops and more buildings for houses, and such would need to be constructed quite quickly. But only a few miles from us, only about a 10-minute drive, was a few more deserted cabins just outside the forest near the mountains that could hold at least a few people there momentarily until more buildings were put up. I normally drove up to the village local pub up there and would drive past them before I got to the pub. The annoying side of it was no one ever really went to stay up there. I don't know why, but as I was living in a rebellious area, I decided why not stay there for a few days if no one else really would. I was always thinking about those abandoned cabins up to the southern west, and been here for nearly 2 years now, but never thought about staying in any of them, as no one lived in them, and this was one of the few particular places in the world you could just decide to stay in without getting in trouble. My days at school, failing and hanging with the wrong crowd sure helped me a lot. I am happily living in a poor village where crime only exists if people would want to bring it in law. No one ever wanted to anyway. The day I packed and left my place, locking it up, hoping it would not have been overtaken by someone else when I got back, as I arrived to a ruined old cabin, with a decaying roof and a twisted flue. I made my first steps in thinking about how different it would be here the next few days for me staying in another house. I couldn't picture what really lay ahead of me. The place was worn out, but I liked it quite a lot and thought about staying a few weeks instead of days. It was freezing temperature outside, but warmed up by the flue as I was cooking my stew. Looking out the window to the night was black, but was not scaring me. I'm used to living by myself at night, could always see nothing but black and hear noises coming from the woods. The following day, I made myself to the local village tavern that I decided to walk to for the first time, as it was just across the cabin I now temporarily found myself at home to. I sat down on the front counter bench to order a glass of Coke mixed with scotch and a bowl of nuts. They call him the Candyman. What? I turned around to see an elderly man 2 seats down from me. He looked back at me, making eye contact, and once again said, "They call him the Candyman because his skin shines bright." I asked him what he was talking about. Who is the Candyman? He grabbed his glass of rum and sculled down a large gulp, and explained to me that there were rumours around being told, mostly in this tavern, about a creature, human-like figure some people see at night through the dark that wanders these grounds, he says in a croaky tone. Why do you think people never leave their houses at night? He says as well. I have never really known. I assumed he was just a regular confused drunk at the tavern. I went back around mid-evening and cooked myself some supper, and after that just cleaned around the house and done up the dishes. I hear an odd sound coming from outside. As I walked outside and went to investigate, I was disturbed by a blood-chilling scream from one of the houses across from where I stayed. Although I still didn't gather what the man said to me earlier than bar, I still imagined what he said about this Candyman creature and how people hid in their houses at night made me shiver and retreat back to my house. I looked out my window, peeking through the curtains, and was calmed down with relief when I saw people helping up a drunken lady, I assumed that fell over, that started making awful noises to herself like a scream. She just got out of the tavern, and I saw other people already out there with her before she screamed, although even if I really paid no attention to them, and this drunken old man just making up tall tales to scare me about how people locked themselves inside at night when a few people hung around outside the tavern at night. A typical drunken tavern-home person thing to say. It was around midday when I went by the store to grab some shopping and headed back, sort of home, to put the refrigerated groceries in my ice bucket. I was bored, so made a stroll down a new part of land I've never walked down before, and there was many places I haven't been to yet that I planned on going to. Like continued to walk further in the woods and walk across this bridge I haven't crossed yet. I did that and continued walking until I stumbled across a track. I decided to follow the track, leading me nowhere really, but I love getting out in the fresh air by myself to enjoy the peace. I noticed a cottage type house. I went to walk past it until I noticed through the door being opened that everything was jumbled up. And I walked in assuming it was an old abandoned cottage, finding scattered toppled shelves and scattered books in a study type room. As I walked through the mess, I noticed a small compartment at the back of the room. I walked over and stood by the door, curious but nervous. I don't know why. And then turned the knob and entered. It was an underground basement. I walked down the creaking steps, turning on the light at the top near the door, and walked down. At the bottom was an old, worn-out table with a rustic chair. The table had a few feathered ink pens with a long note in some kind of foreign code. I couldn't understand it. There was an ice bucket I walked over to, quite like mine, but felt warm. I curiously opened it and was empty. It must used to be where the owner of this house kept their cold goods. I really must be in an abandoned house. I didn't feel right being in this house. Something about it just creeped me out and felt as if I shouldn't be there, but continued exploring around. There was a small window at the top of the ceiling with broken bars. I walked to the back corner of the room to find another door inside the basement. I opened it and stood at the door, inspecting the room. I thought it would have been locked and wished it was, to stop me exploring any further. I knew I should trust my paranoid instincts and get out of this house, but I didn't. It looked like another study. Now, more nervous than before, I began walking through and continuing to look around. There was a couple of old dusty shelves covered with cobwebs and books that looked as if they were from the early 30s. I walked out the back of the room to the corner near a rotting bed that was leaking some sort of oily liquid. But I looked down to see something I caught a glimpse of, just next to the bed. It looked a bit like the liquid leaking from the bed. As it was quite dark, I went to take a closer look using a small torch on my phone, but found something a bit unsettling. It was blood, all over the floor, and some on the wall with handprints. I ran out of that room, dropping my phone, noticing more blood trails on the floor, leading outside the room, near the window. I ran over to the window, dragging the table to stand on to reach myself up to the window, discovering more bloody handprints around the edge of the window, but this time being lashed downwards, like whoever's blood it was probably was trying to escape from something, hoping to drag themselves outside, but was dragged down. I tried to ignore it, and with my lucky stars, even though I wasn't the one in trouble, but was terrified what I just seen, just managed to squeeze through the broken gaps of the bars that were resting on the surface of the ground. I got up on my feet and fled, as fast as my legs would carry me. I didn't really need to report it to anyone, as it would have been there for years. Not that I would be able to report it to anyone anywhere where I live. I started down myself how that the blood would have been there for years, as I just realized. I noticed it seeming to look fresh, and with a small puddle of it on the ground as proof. Not only that, but in the room where the study is, just before I walked over to the door, I could make out that I could sense a hit of freshly lit candles near a table I walked past, like they'd just been lit only just before I entered the room, but didn't bother looking as my attention was more on exploring the house. Oh my god. Could that blood really be recent? A murder happened just before I walked over to that house? Could the attacker been in that house, watching me as I walked in? I didn't remember hearing a scream or anything, or a clutter noise as I approached the house. I made my way back to the cabin. Undoubtedly, my sleep was uneasy. The following morning, I went again back to the tavern to suck down my morning juice of scotch. I guess no need to make fun of drunks myself. I approached through the sideways open cowboy-style door, and again saw the ratty old man sitting at the front of the table bench. I'm not sitting near him again, I said to myself. I made my way over to the tables, down the side, and noticed a young man around my age, sitting at one of the tables. He has been here longer than I have, but I never really paid much note of him. So for the first time, walked over to him and asked him if I could sit and talk with him. I felt a little awkward, but didn't really have any friends, and my possible opportunity of befriending this guy is worth the try. I thought to myself, he must feel a little awkward too, and was waiting for a reply, either something like, "No, I don't know you," or "Feel free." The refusal response was more in my mind of a higher outcome. "Oh, please do join me, buddy," I am always alone and never really have anyone to talk to, or really any friends. Wow, am I talking back to my own clone? He's just a poor lonely guy like me, and I happily sat with him. My name is Stephen, he said. I introduced myself next. Clyde is my name. A pleasure to meet you, Stephen. And a pleasure meeting you, Clyde. I was so happy I had the courage to ask this long-known stranger if I could join benches with him. We shouted each other beers and talked about politics we barely knew about, and asked each other what made ourselves live in a poor, lawless small town. I told him mine, as I mentioned before, and he starts back that he was adopted, not only that, but abandoned by his real parents in the woods, across from where we were, and that he was taken and raised by a lady that moved out to a rather richer part in the continent to live. She was always poor, as he explains, but finally, after picking and selling potatoes from early dawn to late evening, finally made enough money to move somewhere more lively. She encouraged me to go, but I didn't go with her, he explains, because I've always been happy living in a world where you are at your free will and not having to deal with any of this political stuff and jail and law. I'm not saying I go around burgling houses or any of that. I just like the peace of not having to pay tax and all that, and have been here since birth, so living here is a part of me I've connected to. I do miss her, he says. She was a fine mother to me, the best mother I could ever ask for. Amen to her. He asked me whereabouts I live, and I told him that I stay in a village, but at the meantime just decided to live in the cabin up across from here, and pointed at the cabin I was staying in through the window, as we could see it. He looked rather worried about me being there and explained it is best if I go back to the village. I asked him what he meant. He said the population of people living in the cabins up near the mountains were getting low, as complaints about weird noises and stolen goods like crops. The Candyman? I replied. Yes. Do you know? That old guy sitting up on the benches over there told me a couple of days ago, but I assumed he was just drunk. I pointed at him as his back was facing the other way to us. Gordon is an alcoholic, but is rather a harmless old man, but speaks the truth. You mean it's all real? The Candyman exists? Yes. People, and not only others, but even me, with my very own eyes, has witnessed the Candyman. I saw him by the lake a few years back, just wandering around down there. I froze in shock and proceeded in my car back to the village to my house. Many children have been missing within the years, and report cases have been told. It was that thing that got them. Only few people like us believe, but ones that hasn't seen them yet think we're all mad making it all up. They even think we should move out and settle in our own colony. You believe me, Clyde, do you? You are my first friend, and I know you don't think I'm mad like the others. Of course I believe you. I was still a little doubtful, but not 100%. Until it was and wasn't true, as I didn't want my new and first friend to be a nutter. I didn't want to feel like a fool, believing a little in something that might not exist, thinking I was losing it as well. But also, didn't want a dangerous creature to exist, especially if I or no one knows what it actually is. I explained to him about the house, and he says rumors have been told of a young boy and his mum lived there and used to wander down by the lake and sometimes join us at the tavern. Now it is believed they were murdered by the Candyman, probably torn in shreds, some say, but no one ever knows how it kills, as no bodies have ever been found, only blood trails. At night, I couldn't get the image out of my head what this guy told me, just like the old man, and was trying to scratch the idea that this thing probably actually exists and could be out there right now, watching me through the windows. I closed all my curtains. The last thing I wanted to happen to me was end up as a new victim of this thing. I went to sleep after reading a boring book to help me relax, but was woken with a scratching noise on my front door. I had no idea what was making that noise and looked out of my window to see if anyone was there. I shouted out, "Hello?" No reply. I once again shouted out, "Hello?" and still no reply. I was very confused and curious to find out what that noise was, so I grabbed a flashlight and investigated outside the house, but was alone. I even walked around my house, then walked back to the front door. When I got there, I froze in shock to find 4 claw marks on my door, like some sort of giant animal dragged its sharp claws down along the door. I didn't go back inside my house. I ran as fast as I could after a 15-second scare freeze towards the local pub, as I was too scared being all alone with that monster, as the pub was thankfully a 24/7 business. I looked around on my way to make sure whatever had done that wasn't following me. I barged through the doors, gasping with air. It was just at my house. The barman poured me some scotch on the house, sitting me down and handing it to me. "Drink this. It will make you feel better. You are safe with us now." Now I knew it was all true. The Candyman actually existing. Or what else could have made those claw marks on my door? No animal could have claw prints like that, with that size. I could know. And that house with those blood stains, and how it was empty but the blood stains was fresh, and that I even smelt a freshly lit candle. This Candyman, could it actually be real? The main running tavern lent me a room I could stay in without any pay. I calmed down a little, but my mind was still racing. What does this thing do? What does it want? It got that lady and the son in the house, and near from where I stay. There are only a few cabins around where I am, and quite possibly I could be next. I think tonight I'm supposed to. I got to get out of here and move back in my house. I'm not sure if I could even go back to these taverns again, as they are up the mountains. For me, it was time I go back to where I live, especially after tonight. I just remembered one more significantly disturbing thing. When I looked at those claw marks on the door, I realized I just remembered seeing a hint of blood red color, like blood. Could it actually? It must have been blood, but whose? Was it from that house? Again, even though I knew I was safely kept in the tavern, I still had a night too scared to sleep. I got up early in the morning with a hangover and felt awful, but that was the least of my concerns. I was still thinking about the previous night. Something was just outside my door last night, possibly trying to break in and kill me. I didn't know why. And those claw marks engraved in my door. I grabbed some water to wash down the headache and felt as if someone was watching me. I turned my head to notice a few people were peeking at me with their eyes flickering back and forth, trying to make sure I didn't notice with worried expressions on their face. They were whispering things to each other. Then heard a few people giggle and turn their head away from me from a different table. "That's right," I shouted. "So you all are playing with me, aren't you?" "No," said the manager. I headed to the exit. "Please don't leave. We want you to stay with us for your safety. You've got to believe us. We can't afford to lose another," said one lady. But I ignored her and stormed out of that pub and walked back to the cabin. How stupid of me, being so foolish to actually believe those clowns, pulling a joke on me, believing some creature called the Candyman exists. Huh. I bet someone snuck to my cabin and used a tool with sharp edges to scratch my door and paint in a blood red colour. They would have to be pretty strong, whoever did it. The marks were quite deep. But what about that house with no one in there? I thought to myself. And that freshly blood stain. Well, what could I guess someone just hurt themselves and went to get some aid treatment, and I just so happened to be there at the wrong time, or right time, these people messing with me would think. I didn't know why I was in the center of this whole game thing, and why they chose me, and why now, after all these years, and who started it. But it annoyed me enough as I couldn't actually sue anyone, made me more frustrated. How dare they try and disturb my peace, trying to turn me into a paranoid wreck. I had no idea when or how I'd go back to the tavern or anywhere in public with all those mockers. The sad thing is, Stephen was in it, being part of that game, so I guess he wasn't really my friend. I rode my bike for the first time that I brought with me through the woods, down by the river, and back to help me relieve myself. It has always eased any stress I'd come into. Forgetting about those people seducing me, circling in my group, placing me as a piglet in the middle. I felt all calm again. I made myself some more stew for dinner. I had an early night from the night before and slept relatively quickly, but was once again woken with a sudden scratching at the door. "Piss off," I said. I'm not putting up with any of this any longer. The scratching continued. I marched out of my words towards the window to scream at those buggers, but stopped in my trap to hear an odd breathing sound. It couldn't be from any human. What the hell? What is that? I again started making myself to the window, as well as staring at the door from where the noise was coming from, just behind it, as I was getting closer. I pulled the curtains to the side when I got to the window and peeked out, but what I saw wasn't any human. The heavy breathing of an animal with lungs filled my ears. It towered at least 8 feet. The claws were long and sharp, the size of daggers that could easily tear a man in shreds, and its skin glowed and shined in the dark like a crystal. It turned its head and noticed me. I darted my way from the window, scurried to the storeroom and hid and locked myself inside. My heart beating faster than ever. I listened to it trying to kick down the door. I couldn't believe what I saw, most of all, what it was, and the situation I was in. What am I doing in here? I told myself. Out of all the places, I could have gone out the back door. From the fear and shock, my mind just didn't react quick enough and think about the best place to escape. Just the first place I saw, hoping it was a possible place to keep safe, which happens to be the closet. It was too late now. At least the door to the house was fairly strong and would hold it off for a while, but wouldn't forever. As I was listening to it kick the door down and heard its footsteps enter my house. I heard it first walk to the room I was in before, where I slept, and then to the kitchen, clattering and clanging of pots and pans, falling and smashing from dishes. Then the footsteps walked towards the outside of the room I was in. I listened to it helplessly, smashing down the door. I could almost feel its breath on my face. I nearly peed myself. I was sure I was going to die. Just before the final kick, with the luck of my life you couldn't imagine, I saw to the side of me was a small door with a tunnel inside, leading to outside. I never noticed it before, as it was the first time I walked in this small room, but knew what the door was, as I've seen one of these doors before. I tugged hard at the door, but was jammed. Oh great, I thought. Now I'm sure to die. My heart once again sped up, faster than before. But I didn't give up. I was so scared. I pulled desperately at the handle, using all my might, and still listening to the door being kicked. As it gets weaker and nearly down. With the last tug at the door, I managed to pull it open and crawl inside as fast as a mouse and close the door within the instant I got all my body in, when at the exact same time, heard the door break down. I got the hell out of there and crawled through the tunnel, running back to the tavern like I was competing in a short distance race. As I bolted through the door, I was so relieved to see the familiar faces of the bartender and a few people who stayed there tonight, and most of all, Stephen. I told them all that I now again believed them, and told them how I saw it, and all what had happened. Stephen looked as if he was going to faint after listening to me. Another scotch did me good, and I apologised for not believing them before and accusing them of making up a game, taunting me. A few people, the bartender as well, grabbed rifles and locked up the entire tavern just in case it tries to come back. Thankfully it didn't. I've moved myself back to the village and made myself at home again, being welcomed back to my neighbourhood. After all of that, I felt so good being back, and I should count myself lucky and proud that I am on foot in my village once again, because it could have been different. That creature could have been the last thing I seen. I then thought about getting a job and earning money, so I could move far away, out of the country, just in case the Candyman decided to travel to the village and terrorize the villagers. It wasn't that far from the mountains anyway. I had enough of the Candyman. I didn't want it to be the third time for it to try to get me again until I was finally its prey. Within the following week, I managed to get a job at the fruit store, and within about 2 months, I had saved enough money to London to live in peace, and after a few job trials, I finally got a job as an accountant at a motel. It felt different living in a world with law and rules, but I was happy. Plus, I also felt a lot safer, not just from the Candyman, but also from the community back where I lived. Many crimes and stuff happen there, as there's no such thing as crime. A year has passed by, and no one has heard about the Candyman since. I knew this because I had the number to the tavern, also Stephen's. I miss them all, especially Stephen, but wish they too moved out of there, just in case the Candyman comes back one day. I wonder what it was and where it came from, and most of all, what would have happened to me if the scratching didn't wake me and slept while it came into my room, and if I slept from it barging down the door as well, or if I simply ignored it. I don't really want to imagine. I was on the phone to Stephen one last time, asking him how he was. He says he was fine and hasn't been to the tavern ever since I left. I assumed it was because he missed me not being up there anymore. He said a few people he knew went up there a couple of nights ago, but has not yet came back. He says they probably just like staying at the tavern, because no one is mad enough to live in any of those cabins again. No one does anymore, he said. After it coming for you and getting that boy and his mother, and the children in the past, the few people that are staying up there all moved back to the village. No one from other islands has moved in yet, he tells me. As I continue talking to him, I swear, I could hear a familiar breathing coming from his line, and then the phone cutting off. Stephen never answered his phone again after that, and I no longer talk to the people at the tavern anymore, but want to again, just to make sure Stephen is alright. The phone doesn't pick up, it just cuts off. I might one day go back to the village for a visit.